Well, the high volume of women's sports on television that we all know we see that is mainstream today is due in large part to the efforts of my guest today, Carol Stiff, 31 years at ESPN. She is now executive women's sports media consultant, doing her own thing, traveling, winning awards all over the place. We're going to get into that. Some neat distinctions that you just picked up, Carol. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. This is the On to Something podcast. And yeah, let's go to some of those recent awards because as we look at your career, a trailblazer, paving the way for women's sports, and the way in which you mentor too, which I think is so neat, considering that when you think of all these awards, but you're really doing it for others. You think, awards themselves can be me, but that's the last thing that is you because you are opening the door and have opened the door for so many. So we're going to talk about that, but let's go to first of all, when you found out that you were going to be part of the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame, knowing all of the years that you put in building up women's hoops, to see that, where does that stand as far as your level of pride?
Oh boy, great question. Thanks for having me, Bryan, on air. Uh, I was truly speechless. I was always behind the scenes, doing deal making and acquisitions of women's sports programming and propping up either our talent, the athletes themselves. So to be honored and to be in a Hall of Fame of that magnitude was just priceless.
You also, in speaking of something that is priceless, won an award with the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, a Lifetime Achievement Award. And you spoke at an event. What kind of message were you conveying? I think this was in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken, and they were honoring you. When you take the microphone, when you take the stand and you are having an opportunity to spread what your message is, what do you try to get across to people?
Well, I had the honor of receiving 3 awards in like 4 weeks this summer. So it was like the awards just kept. It was humbling at best. But I did have one theme, and the theme was basically what's keeping me up at night. What was keeping me up at night when I left ESPN, and what the answer to that question is: why isn't corporate America doubling down and supporting women's sports? I always point to the fact that these female student athletes, they stay in school, they graduate, they're role models, they sign autographs before NIL for free. They volunteer, as I said, in the community. They go overseas. They do everything you would want your brand associated with. And the fact that we're finally maybe starting to, see a little bit of I don't know, support from advertisers, maybe, is exciting. And hopefully I can get some sleep. And we're embarking on the 50th anniversary of Title IX, which is June 23rd, this coming June. And just watching the Me Too and Time's Up and Black Lives Matter and the bubble and what the WNBA stood for, social awareness. Why wouldn't you want to get involved with these athletes? That was the thing.
So in hearing what you're saying, you've taken and helped see women's sports grow, but there's still so much for it to grow from where it is now. When you were with ESPN and you were trying to get more women's sports on television, what were those early battles like where you stood for something and you were met perhaps with some resistance, but what was it about your resilience early on that helped to lead itself to like a domino effect where then more women's sports got on television?
Well, you had to pick your spots to fight certain battles, and I always was very strategic in how I did fight those battles. Either I aligned with someone that was going to be in the room that could support me, and very often that were men, or I would have outside clients or conference members, mention an idea that I might have had to the higher ups at ESPN. So it was coming from an outside voice. And then lastly, I always had ratings and viewership numbers, in my back pocket. And when I saw an amazing game or an amazing moment in women's sports history, I went running in and showed the value of placing more hours of women's sports, on the family of networks. And I'd also like to add that when we added college sports networks and we added more networks, because I was at ESPN when we only had ESPN, and that was it, in ESPN International. When we started adding some of the college networks, that allowed they had to fill the hours. So that allowed for more women's sports to be on those family of networks. And those conferences, when we renewed many of our acquisitions, would come to the table with Olympic sports on their mind, and we were asked to add more hours of Olympic sports to the hours that we were programming. So it was sort of a timing was right, and when the timing was right, I pounced.
How strong-willed have you had to be through all of this? In seeing what you've done and seeing how your work has elevated the status of women in sports, but through this process, how have you stayed so committed, so strong-willed, and such a fighter all these years?
Well, it's doing the right thing, Brian. I mean, really, why would we ignore a whole other gender of sports? It might not be the sport that you like to watch, but it might be the sport someone else in your home would like to watch. And that's just another demographic that is part of a wise business decision to engage in. So I always try to find different routes in to getting to what I call doing the right thing. And like I just mentioned, you find your spots and then you pounce. But trust me, there's more to be done.
There is more to be done. And what does that more to be done look like from your perspective?
To me, it's putting women's sports in high-profile windows, not on Sunday afternoons where there's an abundance of sporting events. And I might give ESPN a little tip of the hat. When I went to them, hold on, I've got
You're
the call
good.
coming in. It never rings, and now it's ringing.
I love it.
Let me see if I can turn that off. Hold on.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, okay. So back in the day when Diana Taurasi was the biggest sporting athlete in women's sports back in, I think it was 2004, we got an enormous amount of lift every time UConn was on. And so I went into my boss and I go, look, is there any possible way I could get a prime time window for women's basketball during the regular season? Because we do have the NCAA tournament and we are the exclusive home of the women's basketball tournament. Doesn't it make sense to feed storylines early on? So I went into my boss at the time was John Wildhack, who's now at Syracuse as the athletic director, and said, geez, look at this Diana Taurasi. I mean, everyone was talking about her in the newsroom. Everyone knew her name. And so he said, all right, I'll give you a primetime window on Monday night. So that's where Big Monday was hatched. And then fast forward to only just maybe 2 years ago, once again, Thursday night on ESPN, which is more eyeballs, had some opportunities in early January. So I fed them, a 1 versus 2 or a 2 versus 4. It was always top 10 matchups. Everyone was ranked every time they went to air. And so just allowing that opportunity for the game to be watched has brought value to ESPN, and hopefully the sales model will pick up.
Yeah, it certainly will. We're seeing it. It's really cool to see the amount of attention that this latest WNBA playoff had on social media. And we saw the pictures of the packed houses just to see how far it's come. Like you said, I know it's got a long way to go, but seeing the growth, what does it mean to you to watch what it has become, the WNBA, and specifically women's college basketball, in the minds of the casual sports fan?
Well, it's very rewarding. Don't make me cry. I mean, to see,
I've known to do that. No, I'm just kidding.
I just to see the crowds we saw for the finals
Yeah.
were, it was just unbelievable. And then we put the games on ABC, and moving more, gymnastics, softball, women's, basketball over to ABC is massive. Could we put more over on Hulu, which is part of our family of networks? Who knows where that will go? But just to see that growth is just amazing. To see what happened with Carly Lloyd last night with her final game, it's just so refreshing. But Brian, look at the regular season, and how do we increase, ticket sales and attendance in the regular season? And I think if you go out to a WNBA game, it's entertainment. It's fun. It's fun for families, and date nights, etc. And why not do that in the summer when it's so hot outside? Go inside and see, the Sparks play.
Oh, I'm totally with you there. And being that I'm in Los Angeles, the Sparks, oh gosh, I remember those early teams, Lisa Leslie. I mean, there's so many great years with that franchise. What triggered, like, everything that you're doing is so important, but what was the fire starter for you to feel so compelled to take an idea and a concept that makes so much sense, but to then push it to the depth of which you've pushed it on the front lines in inclusion, in more women's sports on television? What was that trigger for you to say, all right, that's it. I'm going to do everything in my power to make a change?
I'd have to point to the 1996, that long ago, Olympic Games in Atlanta, where we saw the USA women's basketball team win their first gold after Tara Vanderveer took an entire year off to train that team. And people must understand that had we not won that gold medal, not sure we would have had launched the WNBA with ballet. So it was sort of a scientific experiment. ESPN2 programmed 8 games of that national team. And remember, all those players took a year off from whatever they were doing. They took a pause in their own lives. They didn't travel overseas to play. They stayed here in the United States. They toured, and we programmed 8 games and then handed it off to NBC. It wasn't only a few years ago, I was at an event, and Dick Embersol was sitting next to me, and I thanked him publicly for making the final event of those 96 Olympic Games the gold medal game, with the USA women winning the gold. And he told me when I sat down next to him, he said that David Stern and Dick had already made that decision going into the Olympic Games, that that was going to be the final event, the crowning of the gold medal. So softball won the gold, soccer won the gold, gymnastics won the gold. They were the gold medal games for women's sports. And then we launched the WNBA, a year later. 95 was the UConn Tennessee women's basketball game that was sold out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And New York Times they were in the building. I've never seen the New York Times cover, a live women's sporting event. So I'd have to look back and really point to 1996 as the start for me. Just the energy level of being, at Gamble Pavilion or being in Atlanta and seeing what was really special about women's sports galvanized me to just never give up and do the right thing.
Carol Stiff is with us. I am Bryan Fenley. You talk about gold medal moments for you, 1996, and then the ensuing momentum that created in getting the WNBA up and running. And 2015 is where I want to go now.
Okay.
Special Olympics, World Summer Games. Why is that maybe the most gold of moments for you?
You did your homework, Brian.
I did not want to waste your time.
No, very, very good, very good. Yeah, I point to that that moment in time because we were in LA and I was at the opening ceremony, and just watching all these special athletes, walk in this opening ceremony, and the Shrivers were there, and I just remember like gasping for air and knowing what these athletes have endured to get to where they were that day brought tears to my eyes. We had our president at the time at ESPN walk in with, I believe it was Brazil. It wasn't even the USA Olympians, and he was teary-eyed. And just to me, that's diversity of sport. That is right there doing the right thing. I don't know if those games were sold out, but we didn't do it for the money. We didn't do it for the money. We did it for the storytelling, and we did it for the right reasons. And that was to showcase diversity and inclusion among all areas, including sports.
When it comes to content like that you're putting out and showcasing diversity, inclusion, and as we talked about earlier on the women's side of things, when getting out more television broadcasts on their end, what is it about the way in which you've advocated for them that has taught you, as you've said a little bit earlier, but has taught you to never give up? And how has that propelled you from who you cover, from who you advocate for? What role have they played within you to propel you even further under the baseline of never giving up?
Ooh, it's a loaded question. There was a story that we told about a year ago. It was about a basketball player that played at Villanova. You should check it out. It was a very short video that we did. I thought it was an hour, but I got talked out of that. But well, for 10 years, I was trying to get this story across the end line at ESPN. And the story is Shelly Pennyfeather played at Villanova. She was a Wade Trophy winner. She was All-American. She was all everything. Went over to Japan because we didn't have a pro league. Played ball over there, took the team from last to first. And then she calls a timeout, and she tells the Japanese owners that I'm going back to the States to become a cloistered nun. So she presently is a cloistered nun in Virginia. And we told her story in a show that we used to do for the NCAA contract, which was called Pride, Passion, and Power. And we did her story, but then I waited and ran into the head coach from Villanova at Madison Square Garden maybe 2 years ago now, and asked how Shelly was doing. And he said, "Oh, Carol, Shelly is 25 years in the convent. She's going to be able to hug her mother." I go, "What?" Because she can't, she's behind glass. Only very few people are allowed to visit her. No one can touch her. Her story is amazing. And she was making six figures back in the day too in Japan. And so the family trusted us, and we went in, and we were allowed to bring a camera into the mass. And the door opens, and there's Shelly in her veil, and she hugs her 83-year-old mother. And she won't be able to touch her mother for another 25 years. So we entitled the program Long Embrace. I encourage all of you to watch it. And if you don't come to some kind of emotion, whether it's a tear or just chills, it's just an amazing story. If you don't get any emotion, there's something wrong with you. But I laid on that story for 10 years and tried to pitch it. And not until I heard this angle did I know now is the time. And just kept going to different people in the editorial staff, trying to just tell the story as quickly as I am here now. And it won an Edward Burrow Award. And everyone that worked on it was just amazed by the family and by Shelley and her story. So it was a long-winded answer to your question, but I just never give up and just find the different angles for my voice to be heard.
Carol Stiff is a guest. I'm Bryan Fenley. How has just the term long embrace symbolic of the work you are doing, considering you have had a long embrace with supporting and being there for others and growing? So when I hear that, the title there, I think to myself, that's what Carol's been doing her whole career. Would you say
Ooh,
that's a way in which you would perceive the work you're doing?
wow, that's very generous and very kind of you to say that, Brian. I I guess it's part of my DNA, that I always use the team approach in my leadership style, where I have all different kinds of folks on the team giving me information or asking questions or learning from. I can, you know, put the ladder down and pull them up, or reach for the ladder and pull it down. But I think it was just part of my DNA. And then one day we were at a WNBA luncheon, and it was years ago, and Madeline Albright was the keynote speaker at this inspirational luncheon. And Tina Thompson at the time was playing for Houston, and she asked Madeline Albright, if we had a female president, would our country be in a better place? And Madeline was actually standing on a milk crate, I can't make that up, to reach the microphone on the podium. And she went on to say that, if it weren't for people like Bill Clinton, that she would have remained a secretary behind a desk. And because of Bill, she was Secretary of State. And she went on to say, meaning that you need to have men in your lives to move forward, and you need women in your lives to move forward. Don't alienate yourself. But not the last thing she said, and it's a quote that I have on my desk, and that the last chapter at ESPN I lived by, and that quote was, "There's a special place in hell for women that don't help women." And that's a motto I live by and continue to live by. And now that I launched a new consulting business, now I can pick and choose what I want to consult on. And I'm sure that Madeline Albright will remain in my heart and in my work moving forward.
I want to ask you about that consulting business in just a moment, but the quote that you just brought up, we see on a regular basis, Carol, the way in which you pick other women up. But how have other women at stages in your career picked you up?
Oh, that's a loaded question as well. I would honestly say more men have been my advocate in the business world that I lived in at ESPN, and where I targeted women that helped me were inside the company, yes. And you build your board of directors, and my board of directors, a lot of the women were outside the company, and they showed me how to navigate, the waters at times were, high tide and low tide. And I wish that more women would help women. And that's why I live by that motto. Men have been in business a lot longer than women, and seem to know how to navigate a little bit better at times. And I hope that, more leadership programming. I know there's a wonderful program right out from the Pat Summit Leadership Group. Fabulous leadership tips and programming on her. She had a definite dozen, like the Pyramid of Success with John Wooden. Pat had her own definite dozen, and those were 9 tips for leadership. And highly recommend that they, I actually called ESPN about a month or 2 months ago to describe and discuss this program, and that maybe Disney would like to, look into it for their employees, male and female. So I hope that answered your question. I just hope that we continue to embrace diversity and inclusion. And that means bringing women to the table with different ideas or different thoughts on a topic or an idea or an action item. And, it also Hispanic, all the different colors that we are. We need them at the table because it's just going to make you stronger and better.
How does your consulting business make that possible? Bringing everybody to the table, stronger and better, and ultimately, Carol, empowering others.
So it's connections. That's where I guess was my strong suit in my career. I used to take Fridays off, and back in the day, before a lot of internet and other items would keep me occupied, but I would make phone calls to people. It might be a Pat Summit, just check on Tyler. How's Tyler doing? And she would be expecting, okay, Carol, why are you calling me? What do you need? And I would just hang up, or I would handwrite notes. And boy, that's a talent that is I don't see very often anymore. It's usually just bills. But I took the time to cultivate my Rolodex, to use an old term, and that's what I'm doing now. I was just out at the sports events and tourism symposium in Birmingham yesterday, and I spoke on ESPN about ESPN's 50/50 project initiative for the celebration and documentation of the 50th anniversary of Title IX. And so looking out at this crowd of hundreds, they didn't probably know what Title IX really meant. And so I had to educate them as quickly as possible so we could get to the action item. And the action item was, how can you celebrate, document, run activities in 50 states surrounding yourself around the 50th anniversary of Title IX? Could it be a marathon? Could it be, I don't know, could it be running one of our films on empowering, or the Dawn Porter film that we're going to be producing for ESPN? I am working on the project for ESPN. So it's just connections and connecting people. And I love learning from that group in Birmingham. I've never been around a tourism group before, and I don't know if I would have if I stayed at ESPN, but now I'm connecting, on another project to that group. And just thinking about where this can go is really empowering me to keep my energy level high.
As far as the connections and the way in which you've developed so many great bonds over the course of your career in sports media, I look at that thank you video that ESPN put out right after you retired. Vic Schaefer, Holly Rowe, Don Staley, Maria Taylor, the list goes on. All of these people you've had profound effects on. What is it about you that resonates so much with your colleagues? And you seemingly get the best out of people.
Wow. You should be my agent, Bryan. I guess it's just being who you are, and never faking it till you make it. I don't believe in that. I truly care about people, and I really care about off the court, off the field, that portion of their lives, if they want to share it or not. And also, I pride myself on, I don't even know if that's a word, prided. I was proud of the fact that making, tough decisions or making tough calls about programming, or maybe a program, I have a few of those stories. Maybe a program's running long into, the title game of the softball championship, and I am the one that has to call the NCAA and tell them, go ahead and play the game. We're going to tape delay it in prime time, and it's probably going to rate better than where it was. So trust me on this. And being able to make that call and don't put it in email or leave it on a voicemail. It's easier to have the one-on-one, and just looking people in the eye and being truthful with them. It goes a long way.
For that reason, your career has gone a long way because of how you treat people. People see you care. And I'm excited to see the way in which you channel your love of of others in building up our society by the projects that you're doing in the future. And so I'm really excited to see the work that you continue to do. The work that you've already done is priceless. And I just want to say thank you, Carol, for all that you've done. And I know sports fans are grateful for everything you've done on the front lines. A fighter, persistent, and someone who does so much for so many people. And I just don't think you get enough credit. Carol
Oh, thanks,
Stiff,
Ron.
of course, Carol Stiff. I'm Bryan Fenley. So much fun having you on. Thanks for a couple minutes of your time.
Thanks for having me.